Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running and nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman. Everyone out there, thank you so much for tuning in. Today on the program, we have a great show planned. We have the one, the only, Scott Schober. He's a longtime Computer America correspondent, cybersecurity expert, and hey, he's all set up in his studio. He looks great, and I think it's going to be a great show. We have a ton of very interesting topics to discuss, and a lot has been happening, surprisingly, in the world of cybersecurity. So I'm looking forward to breaking this down. So everyone out there, thank you for tuning in. ComputerAmerica.com. I want to get that out there just to say that if you want to link to our guest website, any stories that we talk about, anything that we discuss here on today's program, you can find it there at ComputerAmerica.com. Or you can also go over to scottschober.com as well, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes. And hey, you can check out his writings. He has, he has his own series, What Keeps You Awake at Night, or Up at Night. I'm sorry. There's he does a lot of radio interviews and interviews for the news. He has a lot of great content as well as his books, obviously. So you should definitely check that out. So ComputerAmerica.com, reviews and articles and social media, blah, blah, blah. Why don't we go ahead and just get started with Scott Schober. So everyone, let's go ahead, bring him on, and let's see if we have this all set up. And he looks perfect right there. So Scott, welcome back on to Computer America. How you doing?
Great to be on. Hopefully you can hear me and see me okay.
In the nick of time, I think you made everything work. I don't know how you did it, but it's all working perfectly. So thank you so much for for being able to do this. And so I think first things first. How you doing? How you been?
I've been doing good. Trying to adjust with as everybody, probably all your viewers and listeners, to this pandemic that's going on and the easing of restrictions, at least here in the state of New Jersey. We seem to be calming down a little bit, and things are slowly opening up. And by the next week, it looks like a lot more things will be opening up. But I feel terrible because other areas throughout the United States, it seems like there's an uprise in a lot of the cases. So a difficult situation for many people. But hopefully this will pass us one day and get back to some level of normalcy in life, if that can be possible.
And obviously the studio here for us is in North Carolina being one of the states where coronavirus is on the rise. And I definitely am with you there, hoping that this all, works out as well as it can. Though I also want to, and I'm sure this is a realization that as a business owner, you've, become all too aware of. This whole coronavirus thing is, people can get tired of hearing about it. People can get tired of, taking precautions and doing this kind of thing. But, it's going to be here for the next 6, 8, 12, months. We're nowhere near done with corona. There was a headline. It was like, we're done with coronavirus. Coronavirus is not done with us.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. And I think my understanding, again, not as a medical expert, just a curious business owner, consumer that follows the news headlines, it sounds like it might be mutating a little bit, maybe softening, and at least the good news, it will hopefully be less people that are casualties as a result of it. At least that's our hope and prayers. But I think for most of us, we're trying to find a new normalcy. How do you still run a business and function and survive through this? And it's all new to everybody. So I think we're all in this together. And if we can all work together and try to stay safe and protect ourselves and protect those around us, maintain that distancing and use common sense, hopefully it'll end sooner than later.
I definitely agree. And because, like you said, I think that a lot of people are following news, and I've never tried to make Computer America a good place to get coronavirus information because I feel like there are way better places to get that. But I do like to think that Computer America is a good place to get technology information, and especially on your shows here, Scott. Cybersecurity, current events. Easy tips that people can take with them at the end of the show and hopefully make themselves a little bit safer. And why don't we go ahead, and before we get started with all the different news, why don't we talk about what it is that you try to do by coming here on the program and many other programs like ours. What is your mission out there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I'm honored to be able to join you guys each month. And you got a great platform, a great audience. I hear a lot of great feedback in the background between shows. And hopefully that I could share some of my expertise, some of the mistakes I've made, some of the lessons I've learned, and some of the precautions that I could put out there, as you mentioned, tips and things so you could just kind of have a cybersecurity mindset so you can be proactive, so we can not be afraid to go on the internet, not be afraid to use a computer or your smartphone, and stay safe from being a victim of cybercrime, be it your credit card, online banking, your digital life, smart home, everything. It's all kind of interconnected and affects us all. And if we live in fear, we're going to give in and we might be complacent and not do anything. But if we hear about some of the horror stories and some of the things that we're analyzing and doing research on and reporting and discussing, and we can get little tidbits and gems out of it, I think we could make the world a little bit safer, and we could fight back against these cyber criminals. So that's kind of my mission on going a lot of different shows, be it TV, podcasts, radio, writing blogs, or even in my books. I'm trying to really just educate everybody. I'm happy to say I've officially kind of closed the manuscript on the third book there, Senior Cyber, where I'm trying to really
Congrats.
educate seniors and elderly, and that's in the works. So hopefully in the months to come, I'll have kind of a finished book that I'll get your way so you can kind of see a preview of it before it hits the official Amazon and the Barnes and Nobles and all that. So I'm kind of excited about that. And I'm really geared toward those that are older and those that have parents that are older. Like, I'm dealing with both aged parents, and it is difficult trying to help them on a regular basis with password management and not falling victims to scams and identity theft, and all these other topics come up on a regular basis, trying to educate my parents and keep them safe. And I'm trying to share a lot of that knowledge, what I've learned, incorporating that into the book. And I co-wrote it with my brother Craig Schober. He's out in LA.
Hmm.
So we're kind of coast to coast, and we're working together trying to get book number 3 out to the market. So really excited about that. And hopefully we make a difference and really can educate another part of the community that unfortunately I think is neglected. There's almost no books out there that are really dealing with cybersecurity, specifically kind of cybersecurity technology for those that are older. So
And
I'm
yet
very.
they're the most common victims, for sure.
Yeah, it's so true. They're often targeted, but yet there's not a lot out there. There is some stuff, but there's not enough out there. So I'm hoping that this will make a difference there and empower some of the older people out there to say, hey, I can use a computer, I can use a smartphone, and I can be on the internet, and I don't have to be so nervous. I can feel comfortable and not fall victim. So exciting ride.
I'm and by the way, just before we get into the stories, I'm kind of curious that when yourself and Craig were writing the book, a lot of the kind of a lot of the information, especially if you're targeting it for someone who I guess is kind of the go-to technology expert in the family. I'm wondering if it ever crossed your mind to kind of bridge that gap, not just the elderly, but also the newest members of the internet, kind of the younger generation that is going to have to parse through a lot of the same pitfalls.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's even some talk, and this was actually brought up by my daughter. She's 15 years old, and she says, "Dad, what's book number 4? Is it going to be Teen Cyber?" We will see. I said it may just be because there is a lot of younger ones that, to your point, that are newer to the internet, but also I think with the angle of social media, I find a lot of these social media apps that the younger ones, and it could be in middle school and high school, they really accept them, they embrace them, and they do really well. They do it quick. They post pictures and information. And my caution always is, how much information are you putting out there? I always talk about your digital footprint. And
Hmm.
my big concern for younger people are they're not really thinking about maybe if they're going to go on to college or what their future job might be or whatever else. Yet they're putting so much personal information out there. If there's some level of permanency there, and or it could be used against them, there's a caution. They've got to really be careful. So maybe to your point, I'm setting a stage for book number 4. We'll keep you posted on that for sure.
And either take this or don't, but I'm just saying that if you're trying to reach that audience directly, you do a lot of great content that is not in book form. Your blog, your videos, your YouTube videos, things like that, which I think would really reach that audience better. But if you're trying to reach the parents of a younger generation, then that would be a good place to definitely angle the book to.
Yeah,
But
excellent.
hey, we didn't bring you on here to talk about work. We brought you on to talk about work. So there you go. So we have, let's see, one, two, three, four, about 13 different stories, and you sent over a handful. I have a handful here that I was looking at, and I thought that, a good place to start would be, let's see, you sent over this one, and it had to do with the Better Business Bureau warning of COVID-19 contact tracing scams. And this is a technology that we've touched on only once, really, in the contact tracing, because there was a collaboration between Apple and Google, I believe, who were using contact tracing in a certain way, and we talked about it with another correspondent, how the contact tracing worked. But it's a term that has been thrown around, and the idea seems to be getting more and more momentum. In the United States, we do not have a blanket, contact tracing system in place. Other countries do, but as of the moment, no one is, kind of advocating any one particular contact tracing. So I was wondering what this article was about and how people are getting, potentially defrauded by contact tracing.
Yeah, and I think to your point there, contact tracing is certainly, I think, a newer topic for many people, and especially in this country. And I guess it's a proven, somewhat scientific method to really stop the spread of a disease or a problem very quickly by effectively using contact tracers. And at least in New Jersey, it's picking up a lot of steam. They've got X number of thousands of people on board, and there's a lot of information that's been put out there. They're trying to add another 20,000 contact tracers, and the need is for 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, up to 12 hours a day. And I think they're paying
Wow.
starting at $25 an hour. So I thought that was interesting, with a great need of contact tracing out there. And then a lot of people that are now going to be starting to get contacted by these contact tracers. And they basically go through different questions. How do you feel? Where have you been? You possibly could have been in co-located with somebody that does have a particular virus or coronavirus or whatever the case may be. And they go down a series of checklists and kind of find out if you were or were not around this person and who else you possibly could have affected, to really curtail it and quarantine the people that need it. So with that in mind, and everybody's starting to learn about it, what do the cyber criminals do? They use this as a platform. And in this case, the Better Business Bureau, they kind of quickly urge people, be careful. There's a lot of scams that are going around. In this particular case, the article that I talked about here
Hmm.
is specifically for contact tracing scams that are happening. And it actually originates through a text message, but it could also be through email or even through social media. It could be through tweet or something else like that, which is kind of scary. And it's really saying that you potentially were exposed to COVID-19, but click on this link in the text or in the email or the link embedded in the tweet or whatever the case may be for further information. Again, what always happens with scams is they want you to think over here while they're trying to do something here, almost like a magician distracting you. And
It,
that's exactly what's happening in this case, I think. Very, very scary.
yeah, it's and of course, I think one key takeaway from this article here was saying that contact tracers, in a lot of ways, the fact that they're contacting you to begin with, they have some idea of who you are. They have your name, that they have someone that that you've been in contact with, or they may know that, hey, you take the 8:45 bus into town every day for work, and you're like, oh yeah, I do, and and then you go off from there. Contact tracers generally have some form of personal information. And I guess in this one, like you said, it's just a cold text.
Yeah, and you're right. I think the typical way with contact tracing is they get a weekly list, almost like an Excel spreadsheet, and it has the person's information on there, their name, their address, their phone number, and then some specific things that they have to drill down and get answers to specific questions. And then depending upon the answers, it may take them down another tree branch to contact other people. So having some personal information. Now imagine a contact tracing database is compromised. And again, I'm saying this hypothetically.
Yeah.
How effective that could be for somebody, a cyber criminal, to now launch a specific campaign. And really, this is a type of phishing scam in a sense, where you have an embedded link. Because what are they ultimately trying to do with this case that's reported on here? They're trying to get you to click on something, distract you over here with fear, and maybe you have COVID-19, you came across somebody, so your whole focus, let me get more information. The hope is that you click on something, so you then in turn download malware and or divulge further information so they can carry on their scam or their crime. So I caution everybody, be very, very careful. If you are contacted, you need to vet them and verify they are who they say they are before you divulge any information, or before you're too quick to click onto something that it claims to be when it may not be.
For sure, for sure. So yeah, that is a completely new. Well, it's an old one with a modern twist, and it's like so many other cybersecurity threats out there. That tends to be the way. It's adding a little of today's nuances to old tricks. And that's why, hey, you may hear us repeat ourselves often. It's because the advice, that we gave 5 years ago is probably the same advice we would give today, just, with different words wrapped around it. So there you go. So that one was pretty interesting. Another one that I wanted to talk about, and this is, and I don't know if you had a chance to look at this. You probably didn't just for the show, because I'm very, very late in sending these things. But this one, this is an article from Forbes, and it had to do with Adobe and Adobe Flash. Many, many, many websites were designed and created using Flash. And Scott, I'm going to ask you real quick. How many times have you heard of security vulnerabilities happening through Flash?
Wow. Well, I could speak firsthand because I had a problem this morning, even when I did the latest update to my Apple latest, I think it's Catalina or something like that, OS.
Yeah.
And I had problems with Flash immediately. So it flagged it and said, this is a potential virus here. It could be malware. And I had to stop in a couple areas and had some problems and difficulty, and some files were actually damaged. And I'm still working through the whole mess and have to work on it again later tonight. It is constantly a problem with Adobe Flash. And there are so many scams that will redirect you to fictitious sites that you believe you're updating to the latest Flash because you want to watch that, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really just a redirect to another site that's dispensing malware, causing all kinds of havoc. And it doesn't target any one specific person or user, or even OS for that matter. It's going after a lot of people, anybody that's really going to be using Flash. So we all got to be extra careful on that.
For sure. And many of the attacks, and like the real problem is, along with everything you just said, but like the real problem is that you had like 1 million+ websites that were designed using Flash. And, Scott, like, let's say when we talk about Mac versus Windows in terms of security, it's not because Mac has made some kind of silver encrusted gilded cage that hackers just can't get into. It's just that, there, for every one Mac out there, there's 19 other Windows machines that they could potentially be targeting. It's just a smaller target, and it's not a matter of security, it's a matter of numbers. That's what Flash is. Flash is the huge security vulnerability that everyone looks for because it's so ubiquitous across the internet. And, according to Forbes here in the article, they're saying that even though we have known about the end of Flash, it's coming by the end of this year, in case anyone didn't hear. But the end of Adobe Flash support is this year, yet millions of websites are still using Flash as the backend instead of HTML5. HTML5 is the recommended, go-to. And, they're still using Flash. And the problem is all the security vulnerabilities that we know about are still there. And they're all going to cut out kind of immediately. So I want to bring up this article, Scott, because of two things. One, to let everyone know that Flash support is ending. And two, it's going to make a difference in the cybersecurity landscape. I really do think. I mean, aside from hundreds of thousands of websites crashing and suddenly not being supported anymore, but it's also from a security standpoint, like this is going to be one of the biggest transitions for security's sake I think we've had in a long time.
Yeah, I agree totally. And I think anytime there's an end of life, anything in the world of software, and it's used by the masses, and Adobe, like you mentioned, it is used by literally millions of people and millions of websites. It has a tremendous impact. And I often liken it to, in the world of cybersecurity, what happened when, with Windows, and you look at some older Windows legacy software, maybe XP or whatever the case may be, and there are people out there that are still using it, or even some browsers where they said, we're no longer supporting this browser, or we're not going to be providing any security patches. Yeah, it still works. And guess what? There's still millions upon millions of people that are using it, but just not consumers. But even in point of sale terminals and ATMs and things that are financially related, that's really scary. So cyber criminals, they follow articles like this to the T, because that tells them, here's where we're going to set our sights over the course of the next few months. Because at the end of the year, when they do an official end of life and people will not migrate, it may take 2 years before people will actually say, all right, finally, I'm going to cut the cord and stop using this. By then, they may be compromised. It may be too late, and it's going to cost countless number of hours of time, and who knows how much damage to different systems and websites down. And I can only imagine it is going to be a cybersecurity nightmare, and it's coming soon.
Yeah, it certainly is. And again, by the end of the year, everything Flash. If you have any kind of modern browser, they say Flash is ending support by the end of the year. And according to this article, 2.6% of the top 10 million sites still use Flash as its programming language, and that's like the top of all the websites, and that's 260,000 websites. And then, of course, I think there's like varying estimates of about 1.5 billion websites across the internet. So, hundreds of thousands, if not, over 1 million websites are going to come to a screeching halt. But hopefully, at the end of the day, this is all in the name of security. And, I actually like your analogy of like switching from Windows XP. Windows XP may still work, but, its lifespan has run out, security updates have stopped, and it's time to switch, no matter how painful it may be. So, Adobe Flash ending, there you go. So there's that one. Now let's go ahead and pick a story from a number of the stories that you sent over. And, this is actually very relevant. Something that we have not talked about on the show. I've mentioned Zoom bombing in passing a couple of times where people will, and this is more of a thing when Zoom was first, kind of on the rise, and it didn't have all the features that it has today. I actually just received an email today saying that by next month, every single Zoom call will have either a password or a waiting room. There will be no Zoom calls without a password or without a waiting room. And that is to stop things like this next article we are about to talk about Zoom bombing and hate hacking. So let's talk about racism in the virtual workspace, because obviously there's alongside coronavirus, as if there weren't enough things going on, but this is a social cause that a lot of people have picked up, and I believe rightfully so. There's a huge movement for racial equality and racial justice, and this whole thing. I have not heard how this has transitioned, because Zoom and virtual meeting spaces have been on the rise ever since we've all been locked in our homes. Now, I guess this is not hacktivism. Hacktivism, I think, is something a little bit different than what we're about to talk about. This is more kind of interrupting our new workflows, I guess.
Yeah. I think this is kind of, I call this as almost like a trifecta of things coming together. We've got over here COVID-19, which is causing this remote working from home and trying to survive and adapt, and companies trying to stay afloat. And then you've got the certainly heightened awareness of all the racial problems and tensions throughout, especially in the United States now, but it's really, in a sense, a global problem too.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things kind of coming together. And again, this disruption, be it hackers, cyber criminals, white supremacists, whatever, all these different groups that are trying to state what they stand behind and what they're for. Unfortunately, it disproportionately targets certain people, and that's where it's really not fair there. And in this case, a lot of it's colored people. They're trying to say that they're being targeted, racist things and derogatory terms. These criminals are kind of jumping into these Zoom meetings, and they're targeted meetings, and they're saying a lot of vulgarity and a lot of racist comments and disparaging things that are affecting people. Normally, somebody that is going to work wouldn't be exposed to these type of things. Now they have no choice but to work remotely, to be on Zoom, or it could be other platforms as well, any type of video conferencing. And now they're hearing this, and their day is disruptive, their workflow is disruptive, and more importantly, they're receiving comments that are very derogatory directed at them. If they're a particular race or nationality or this or that, that could be hurtful, and that could be very difficult just to carry on your normal day with this whole pandemic going on. And again, it's kind of technology that is being used for good, but at the same time is being misused for somebody trying to get their message across wrongfully. And that has to stop. And it's hard to there's not a filter or a switch that stops it. That's part of the challenge. But to your point, by enabling waiting rooms, it allows you to vet who joins the meeting and who doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
That's important, because it could be somebody you don't know and they're not an invited guest, but somehow they picked up the link, or they're using automated software to guess the link so they could cause havoc or something like that, or they don't have the right password, or they're trying to hack in. So you can have some level of controls. I should add to it, if you have a disruptive individual, there are hosts and co-hosts that will moderate and control a Zoom meeting, and they can remove the individual, or if they're not sure if they should be removed or they need to be talked to or warned first, they can remove them and put them in a waiting room where they can individually chat with them and find out, hey, who are you? What are you bringing up? You can't talk like this or bring up these things. If you do it again, you will be removed. And then they could permanently remove them from that said meeting. And then there's also a level of reporting. You could report them to Zoom so they can be flagged from joining other meetings and things like that. So there's some level of control there, but limited.
Yeah, for sure. And for something like, let's say, the radio show that we're doing here now, it's not hard, because I'm expecting two people in this in this meeting, myself and Scott. But for, let's say, for instance, a place of worship or a class, for a university or whatever class, a business meeting where you have, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, 100 people, it gets a little bit harder. And of course, one person can completely disrupt the entire thing. And beyond that, reading through the article a bit, it looks like, how do people get these links? Are they intercepting emails, or are they doing this? No, in a lot of cases, it seems like, let's say you have a class of 100 people. It just takes one person to be on a social media site or post a link somewhere to say, hey, my class is going to be hosted here at this time. Feel free to come in and disrupt and say whatever you want. Here's the link. These links, can be shared by anyone. And then, of course, without waiting rooms and passwords, although they're being mandated soon, anyone can come in and just do that. Obviously, if you worked in an office building, no one's going to come into the break room and just start shouting racial slurs and obscenities. But the internet, Scott, and I'm sure that you've been using the internet long enough, the elements of being anonymous, the elements of just not having to deal with the repercussions of your actions, and almost like disassociating people as people on the internet, it's just someone on the internet instead of a person on the internet, that leads people to do very weird and very bad things.
Yeah. And I even see it down to the level my kids have shared, again, one in middle school, upper middle school, and the other in high school. Up until recently school has ended for summer break now, they had to contend, and most of that was on I think Google Meet, with disruptive kids within the classroom. But what would happen is these unruly kids would share the link to the meeting with their buddies, who would then come in and make fun of the teacher. They would say derogatory remarks, this or that, whatever. But guess what? The entire focus, now you've got a class of 20 to 25 kids that are laughing, joking around. They're not learning. They're distracted. It's hard to get them back on the same page, and so to say, to get them learning again. And that's what I think, unfortunately, a lot of these video conferencings have become a little bit unruly. It's hard enough for a teacher. They're probably very frustrated. They make best efforts to teach kids. And now you've got to babysit them. And you've got to become now police, who can come into the meeting, who can't, who's got their camera off, whose microphones are on or off, all the disruptions. It's making learning very difficult. And to your point earlier, this whole pandemic really hasn't gone away. If there's an uprising comes back in the new school year, they're going to have to deal with a lot of that. And the same thing from a business standpoint. Our new norm, I'm typically on a video conference, probably 2 to 3 a day I am on now. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And then I go home and I'm on it with family members on the weekend for services, for this. There's a lot of things that we're on video conferencing. That's the new norm, and it may be that way for a while. So I think security protocol needs to get into place sooner than later, or we're all going to be wasting a lot of time and all be exposed to a lot of things. And in many cases, with some of the breaches, which really wasn't reported on a whole lot with Zoom and even some others, some of them were actually compromised where the information has been recorded. It went up to the cloud, the actual meeting. So what we're on right now, it could be recorded up on the cloud. And that's what they were hacking into and distributing and selling down in the dark web. Not just the email addresses, the meeting IDs, the passwords, the names, the phone numbers, and all of that, but even the actual recorded meetings. And that was a concern because in the world of business, sometimes you're having a business meeting that is a confidential meeting. You're sharing intellectual property, know-how, your secret sauce. That's out there on the cloud that people from anywhere around the world have access to or could buy or sell on the dark web. Huge security concern. I think that's what really upped the ante for Zoom to take some of these steps to minimize the damage.
And right there in the options, it's like Alt-C, if anyone didn't know, but it's record to the cloud. It is an option. Obviously, if someone couldn't make the meeting, a very simple option like that would allow someone who couldn't attend to be able to at least watch it back and kind of get the relevant information. a very useful feature, but one, as you said, was being compromised and kind of being used for the improper purposes. But there's also another story, and I don't have it here up on the website, but to that effect, it was also there was some talk about China and how they were using some Zoom IDs to essentially identify dissenters and people who were getting around the firewalls in China to join these, I guess, like online protest groups and online rallies that they were having, and they were using the data stored on Chinese servers to identify Chinese citizens in Zoom calls. And of course, that led to a whole nother backlash. But I got to say, Scott, I'm used to software companies, especially the likes of the giants, Facebook, Apple, Google, Twitter. Whenever there's a security issue, I expect some boilerplate, sorry, we're looking into it, and then I'm expecting to never hear of it again. Except maybe 3 months later, they'll release a security update. Like, very, very slow moving. I gotta say, Zoom, every time there's some kind of critique or anytime that they make the news, within about a week or two, they have a new policy going in place. Or, with the Chinese allegations one, they said that all US-based Zoom calls will be hosted on US-based servers and will not be subject to any kind of intervention viewing from China. Like, every time Zoom makes the news, I got to give them credit. They quickly change their policies.
Yeah, you make a fabulous point there. And I thought it was interesting if you actually dig into because again, I'm a Zoom customer. I like the platform a lot. I'm glad that they've taken steps and have done it fairly quickly to make it a more secure platform. They do actually allow you some options. If you go into settings, you could actually see if there's a lot of traffic in the US and it gets bogged down, you can actually click off where else you would allow your data to be routed through.
Yeah.
And one of them is China, which is disabled, so it doesn't route it through China, to your point there. And I think the underlying reason, which I thought was interesting, Zoom said they do end-to-end encryption, which they do. However, when it's routed through China, if the Chinese government demands for the decryption keys, they're required to give it to them.
Yep.
So they can actually decrypt it and do whatever is needed there with the data that they're trying to do with it, be it citizens or whatever. So it's interesting the way that all unfolded there.
Yeah, the end-to-end encryption was another one. I could think of course, the waiting rooms, the passwords, the routing, the transparency. Admittedly, one would hope that these would have not been issues to begin with, but they did respond quickly. And I think that for a platform like Zoom that I think maybe 8 months ago, no one had even heard of, and suddenly, or very, very few people had heard of, and now everyone knows about a Zoom meeting, they've been making some good transitions. So there you go, hate hacking and all that kind of thing. Obviously, this has to do not just with Zoom. It's happening in Google meeting places and Facebook groups. This is happening all over the internet and anywhere that people are having these face-to-face conversations. It's, Scott, sometimes we talk about cybersecurity that is compromised passwords. We talk about, there's a legitimate flaw in the technology. This is more of a social problem. People will always have to connect to these calls. People will be people, and sometimes people will be nasty people. So it's on the rise. I just don't see it going down because, I hope that it does, but it's just people. It's not technology here.
Yeah, and to your point, people are the problem there. And I think what really emphasizes this entire thing is we're kind of at crossroads with all of these different things happening because of the COVID stuff, because of many of these movements with a lot of racial tension and people frustrated with that, with everybody spending more time at home, people maybe on or off social media a little bit more, a lot of disruption in your norm. That causes a lot of these things to happen. But also look at Zoom, just the sheer number of people on. I mean, the one statistic in the article there's 300 million meetings that take place on Zoom each day.
That's a lot.
Blew my mind. That's a lot. That's a lot of data. That's a lot of meetings. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of opportunity for cyber criminals, for disruptors to get out there and try to spread their hate or their message or just cause havoc or whatever else. And that's part of the problem. And that's what we're seeing. If anybody wants to have a good laugh, take a look at some of the Zoom fails. I try not to focus on all the Zoom bombings, the nasty stuff, but just even some of the Zoom fails will make you chuckle, if nothing else, because it's kind of crazy that what people do on Zoom, they just forget the element that they're in. I did that with the kids the other week, and we were laughing for about 2 hours one night just to do something simple. If you want to have some fun as a family, check out some Zoom fails, do a search on that, and look at those videos. You will die laughing at some of them.
Yeah, it's obviously here for the radio show and obviously for the recordings that you do. It took me some time. I'm sure it took you some time, Scott, to realize that, even if you don't think you're on camera, if you're in front of the camera, you have to assume it's on at all times. You can't, you can't adjust your clothing. You can't pick your nose. You can't straighten your hair. It's just going to look weird and potentially, hey, the camera could actually be on. So, a lot of people working from home, they're getting comfortable and they don't realize it. And I'm sure that there's a lot more that happens than we know about. So there you go. There's that one. Scott, let's go ahead and move on to the next topic. Now, this one, I play a lot of video games. I'm actually pretty up to date on video game, kind of what's out there, the culture, that kind of thing. I got to say, though, you took me out of left field from this one. Stalker Online. First of all, ominous name. Second of all, they had a breach. 1.3 million user records have been stolen. I had not heard about Stalker Online. Now I have, but talk about this and why did this particular breach catch your eye?
And I think it caught my eye because I didn't know much about it, and I come from the world of games. I think a bit older than yourself, but my life was growing up playing Atari games. My favorite game is Centipede. I've got a stand-up arcade machine and a sit-down cocktail table.
I'm jealous.
In my office here. So I'm still addicted to games, but the newer games I can't make the same connection on. But I'm fascinated how popular they are in the online community over the internet. I'm very used to playing with myself with the game or friends coming over playing games, but the world has really changed with the online community. And of course, with that allows the ability for things like this to happen. In this particular case, the article, the researchers came across and they said 1.3 million user records that were sold on dark web forums. So not only are things compromised, and in this case, it was the typical, the name, the username, the email addresses, phone numbers. And I thought also the IP addresses, so they know really the location of these people where they're actually playing. It's sold on dark web forums. And I started thinking about that. And I said, geez, there is a perfect market. And I think you talked about this earlier. The crimes on the internet allow people to be anonymous. Mm-hmm. And again and again and again, I think people that maybe were on the edge or on the fence now suddenly become a cyber criminal because they see it's easy to do it. There's that anonymity, and you have a whole platform, the dark web, that's really hard to police. It is like the Wild West. And that's exactly what starts to happen here. Now, to their credit, the information, the passwords, they were stored in an encrypted fashion and hashed, and they mentioned, in, not to get in the technical side, but MD5 there, which is a method of encryption, an algorithm there. But the problem is it's dated. And that's really probably the fundamental thing that really stood out to me here. And if you do a little bit of research, it mentions, I think you even touched on it in the article, that a quarter of all the major content manufacturer systems use old and outdated MD5 for storing passwords and everything. That's scary.
Yeah, I mean, this is not uncommon to I guess you would think of it to some extent that they work with computers. That's kind of technology related, that kind of thing. But it's just like it's just like a bakery. It's just like a hardware store. It's just like whatever. They're there to do a service or to provide you with something, and they are not there to be IT professionals. They are going to take the bare minimum as they see it, and they're going to keep it, as well as they can. But they're not IT professionals. They're there to make video games, and they're there to, make sure the servers stay up for their users. They're not going to be, updating every 6 months to a completely new password protection algorithm. So that makes sense. That makes sense in a lot of industries.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is coming from the world of business, but we also are in technology, and like yourself too. Everybody always encourages you from the business side to always stay very laser focused on what your business is. You got to excel at what your business is, and that keep that as your core focus.
Hmm.
Outsource other things, so on and so forth. But when you look at cases like this for a gaming company, or you even look back to a few years ago, you look at what happened with Ashley Madison, a cheating website. Yeah, they
Remember
stuck
that?
really good to their core business. But what they didn't do really well is the cybersecurity side, keeping that information safe, even though they sold a plan where you pay extra money to make sure it's 100% confidential and nothing would ever happen. Nobody would ever find out that you're cheating on your spouse or whatever.
Ashley Madison, to get on a little tangent here, Ashley Madison was hilarious because the data that was leaked showed that I think there were something like 19 guys to every one female on the platform, and it was like 90% of the females on the platform were bots. They were all fake profiles. Oh my God. But, who's going to call up their credit bureau and be like, I was trying to cheat on my wife, and I think something's fishy here. It's, no one did that, but I digress. That's a whole different topic.
And even in what was revealed in the database, I think to me, the part that was kind of scary was they revealed that a lot of people in the military, a lot of scientists, a lot of researchers.
Isn't it scary, Scott? Isn't it scary that you could sign up for a spousal cheating website, and you have a form there to onload people, and it says, hey, give us your first name, last name, email address, probably home address, billing information. Oh, give us your profession and all this other information, and the guys still did it. They still gave the information. I wouldn't. Oh my God! I'm not saying I would be on there, but I'm saying that why does a company like that need to know my occupation?
Yeah, and the part that was kind of funny, I think, some of the different research that I did, because that was a chapter in one of my books.
Yeah.
I laughed about it because they would create an alias name, Joe Smith, but then they would put their actual email address that would end in .edu or .mil or whatever. And I'm thinking, what are you thinking? But, I guess we know what they were thinking, and that was part of the problem with it. But time and time again, part of our core business really is also cybersecurity. And hence was the reason I wrote book number 2, Cybersecurity is Everybody's Business, because if it's not part of our business, we're going to fall victim. We're going to make a mistake. We're going to be the victim of a cyber crime, and it really could affect our bottom line. So it is something that's serious, and you got to do at least best practices. And that's what I think is a great platform, this show, where we could share some tips, share knowledge, and just awareness overall, so people don't keep falling victim to cyber criminals.
So, and this getting back to Stalker Online and and kind of the service itself. And this is why I had not heard about it, because I just had to look it up. It looks like it's a primarily Russian MMO RPG. So this has been out for a number of years, like almost 10 years, I think, at this point. 2012 was when they opened their first one, their first server in Moscow. And, they have I'd say about almost 100%, honestly, of their user base is Russian. So that would be why myself as an American had not heard about this. But Russia is also pretty prolific. Russia and other parts of the Baltics are pretty prolific in cybersecurity ne'er-do-wells, I guess.
Yes, very, very true.
So there you go. And I guess they stole, like you said, names, passwords, email addresses, phone numbers, IP addresses, as well as the accounts themselves, which they could then sell to other players to, for some quick cash. So that was a very interesting one. I had not heard about that, but obviously, sometimes we talk about government officials, sometimes we talk about medical records that are stolen. There is no data that is completely useless. Someone out there will take it, steal it, put it up for sale somewhere. So,
And the interesting thing is, it does go back to supply and demand, and there is a value associated to data. And I think more and more, and I forget, I was in an interview the other day
Mhm.
talking so much about our digital footprint and the value that now bad guys will place and associate to our data. And we really don't think about that often. You think, "Wow." I hear that's one of the most common phrases I hear people when I'm trying to preach cyber and best practices. They say, "Come on, Scott, my data, I don't have anything to hide. I don't have anything worth value." And I keep telling people, "You do. You
Yeah.
absolutely do. Why do you protect it? Why do you have a password to protect it? It's because there's value there. The content of your data and things about you and what you like and what you dislike, where you go, what you eat, that all has some level of value, and companies are willing to pay for it." And I always liken it to the average search when you go up to, or the average thing when you put into your browser is now sold to over 20 different companies, what you type into your browser.
Hmm.
What does that tell you? And I'm not talking about a lot of money, but fractions of pennies they're willing to pay because they want to know what you're typing in, because they could then use that data about data, which is metadata, so they could then target you effectively so you can buy things from them, or they could push ads for other companies. And there's value to it. We got to keep that in mind. So we want to be careful what we type and what we share across the board.
That's yeah, and that is actually a very very good transition for uh, a great segue for actually, and even that's a great segue for another segue. But that's a good transition for this next story. We have time for two more stories, and the last one's going to be kind of lighthearted, so don't worry about that. But there is this big incestuous kind of relationship with data where companies will collect it, they'll sell it to other companies that then use their sanitized data collections to sell to other companies so that they could sell to you better. Like data itself, your data is probably not that valuable, but your data among hundreds of thousands, among millions of people's of other people's data is very valuable, and companies will kind of chase their own tail or chase that data around in circles. And it's a huge industry, billions of dollars every single year, which is why this article, I don't know if you had a chance to see this, Scott, this just came out today. And it had to do with Google, so that they will automatically delete your location history by default. And this is something that, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure Google keeps a copy of it, but yeah, for other people who may try to tap into Google's, kind of past user data, they said that after 18 months, so it's not, 30 days, it's not a week, it's not the same day, but 18 months after your location was tracked, and Scott, I'm sure as you know, and a lot of listeners out there know, your location can be tracked by signing into a Wi-Fi network. It can be connecting to a cell phone tower. It can be saying, hey Yelp, I was at this restaurant. Things like that. All track user location data. 18 months automatically from Google. Scott, what do you think about companies? Baby steps, getting a little bit more active in, sanitizing people's data that they've collected.
Well, I do think that maybe it's a step in the right direction. If it was immediate, that would be great. I'd be like, yeah, wonderful. 18 months is kind of a long time. And keep in mind, I think you touched on it there. There's so many different ways that they can collect and aggregate this data to know our whereabouts. And that's the
Right.
point I think people don't fully understand. And it's everything from, if you're driving your car and you have an easy pass, guess what? There's transponders throughout different cities that have absolutely nothing to do with tolls. They're just really picking up your whereabouts. And again, that's corresponding to you as a person, your vehicle, your license plate, your registration, and it's geolocated. So they know if you're driving down this particular street at this particular time, and if you do that every single day. And all of that history can be aggregated, and using algorithms, they can know somebody's whereabouts or even predictive patterns. Well, that's Scott. He's commuting to work every day, and based upon where his Easy Pass is, we know that.
Yeah.
We even developed our company an Easy Pass detector called the Detect-A-Pass. You put it on your dashboard, and every time that somebody's trying to ping your Easy Pass, we'll set off an alert. Interesting. So I take this thing, I put it on my dashboard, I just drive around random places. I'm picking up pings all the time where they're trying to see, for whatever reason, where somebody's Easy Pass is. It's scary. That's just one example there. You mentioned Wi-Fi. Every time our smartphone, we go on to a Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi or a hotspot or this or that,
Mm-hmm.
and most of us might be using a broadband provider that provides, 20,000 free hotspot locations. Well, if we leave our Wi-Fi on, every time my phone goes past a telephone pole with an access point and a hotspot up there,
Mm-hmm.
guess what? It's doing it in the background. It automatically is associating with it. I'm not touching it. I'm not doing anything. I'm not even on Wi-Fi, but my Wi-Fi is on. In
Yeah.
fact, the average person, about 80% of their Wi-Fi is on. So they can use that information again to know where we are. So aggregating all of that, that's really what's so powerful and so scary. So I'm glad they're taking steps here. It's a great article here. They're
Baby
digging
steps.
baby steps. Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
Baby steps, because really, when you think about it, the information 18 months after the fact probably isn't that valuable. But to their credit, and as you just said, people don't realize just how much location data is being served and tracked, and and being collected. Realize this: before this article, there was no time limit for Google, at least, and there continues to be no time limit for Apple, Microsoft, for any, or Facebook, definitely Facebook. There is no time limit for any other tech company. They keep it forever and ever and ever. And Google is the first one to say, maybe they've collected so much data, they're just tired of paying for storage, but 18 months, it's not even that valuable, but they put a number to it. Every other tech company, they did not.
Yeah, and I think what we probably can get out of that the sinister side of me says, since Google is a great technology company, they know how to effectively monetize everything, which tells me the diminishing value of the data at a certain point, and it probably is worth $0 at 18 months. So that's why they picked 18 months. That's all.
But at least they have a date, because if you go, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to scare yourself, feel free to go onto Facebook, download your own personal data, and you will see pictures from 12 years ago that you don't even remember taking, that you uploaded to Facebook 12 years ago.
It's scary stuff. I've done a test even. We laugh. I take my son's name and put it into Google, and then do an image search. And I not only see pictures of my son for different things that people have snapped, and people that I don't even know took his picture at school or this or that that are geotagged, but I also see it associated to my dead grandmother's photos.
Yeah,
from
the whole family
almost 10 years ago. And then you start to get scared and you say, "Oh, that's eerie." So you start to see the connections, how powerful data really is in something such as a Google engine.
Just something as simple as, let's say, an obituary saying that so and so is survived by their relatives, and then they list the full name. Just one line of text, and you're connected in this huge internet. So it's certainly doesn't make a difference. But hey, there are ways to protect yourself, and hey, there's hopefully we've given you some tips, Scott. We have less than a minute. I do want to get one last little story in, and then we'll talk about what it is you're doing over at scottschober.com. But the last story I wanted to bring up, Scott, did you ever ride on a Segway?
You know what? I did not. I came this close to it. It's a longer story. I won't tell you, but I was in Nice, France.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually with one of the senior NSA guys, and we were walking along the street, and I saw a Segway, and I walked over with my wallet in hand. I said, "I'm going to get on that." And they were having lessons there, and there was a girl that was driving it, and she went right off the curb and hit into a car,
Oh,
slashed her head open, bleeding everywhere. I put my wallet back in my pocket and I turned around and walked away. So I said, no, I learned the hard way. I'm not going to take a risk.
I thought you couldn't fall over on him. I thought that was their big appeal, but yeah.
Well, I thought, wow, she hit the car hard and just gashed her head open. So obviously I was wrong, or she wasn't too good at it.
I hope that she's doing okay, but the story, and we'll have a link in the show notes if anyone wants to check out in fuller detail, but the Segway that was supposed to revolutionize the way everyone got around is being discontinued by the company. So the Segway is no longer being produced in any form, any version, any iteration. The Segway is dead. So there you go. Scott, in the last 30 seconds, what do you have new over at scottschober.com?
I'm actually doing a ton of virtual conferences, speaking at some virtual conferences. So check out scottschober.com. And if you see a conference of interest, certainly join in there. They're all free to attend and a lot of different topics and things. So feel free to check out my website for tips and other things there and the upcoming books. So.
I gotcha. And hey, everyone, once again, computeramerica.com will have a link. I want to thank you so much, Scott, and everyone else out there listening. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Take care. Stay safe.